There we go. Thanks, Vanessa.
That's okay. Thank you. So thanks everyone for joining. Yeah, really nice to have you all here. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about probably a pretty big aim, really, when I look at the sort of topics, but managing anxiety through breast cancer and then the roller coaster of emotions that come. And I've hopefully not been too ambitious when I've put this content in, but there is quite a lot. So some things I'll spend a bit more time on, and some things I'll go through a little bit quickly. But it's nice that it's recorded. So if you do miss some things, you can always go back. And just before I start fully into the presentation, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're all living. And maybe for those of you who are in Melbourne, which I'm assuming is probably a number of you, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respect to elders past and present and anyone here today. And in today's presentation, I hope to kind of give a little bit of an overview on the psychosocial impacts of cancer, which I'm sure I don't have to tell many of you about, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that are common that you've experienced. Managing our kind of roller coaster of emotions that can come with getting a diagnosis of cancer and then living with it. Managing anxiety in particular will be one of the focuses, and I'm really going to try and look at a couple of ways that anxiety can present in breast cancer. And these two in particular that I'm going to look at a little bit today are scan anxiety, or often called Scanxiety, and fear of cancer recurrence and progression, which we know are very common for many people. And then what supports can be helpful from here, and how do we know kind of if we're doing okay, do we need more help? That's always a question that kind of can come up for people. And I guess even that Christina went a little bit on housekeeping, and like I think I let most of you know that were there at the beginning. Please always know, because these topics I know sometimes can be, a little bit triggering for people. There might be something in particular that raises your anxiety, and of course you're on a Zoom meeting, so you can easily go and take a break if you need, turn your camera off or do any of those things. And it's okay to interrupt me as well. So I'm happy to have interaction if there's something where you want to put something in the chat, raise your hand, or even if you can't do any of those things, just kind of call out. And I'll try my best. And then otherwise, for most questions, I will definitely leave some time at the end where I'm happy to answer your questions. And so one of the things you don't have to kind of verbally answer this, but I often just find it useful to ask people how you're feeling as you're arriving today in the presentation, and how you're feeling about coming to this webinar today, because it can be very different for different people. Some people might be curious or interested in what the topic's going to be. Some people might feel a bit overwhelmed today, or just have a lot on their plate. So you're welcome to put in anything in the chat if you want to, or just kind of contemplate it for yourself. And then I think when we think about I guess want to start with that kind of, the riding the wave of breast cancer, which I'm sure many of you have heard that term before, and kind of think about that there are so many emotions that you're going to have experienced throughout treatment and beyond, kind of before, during, and after, really. And I often encourage people to think about that there is such a roller coaster. Like, we expect that to be there. Like, we know it's going to be very up and down. But what does kind of riding the wave involve for you? And a little bit today, I'm going to probably concentrate a bit more on, when would someone know they're sinking a little bit when they're not kind of riding the wave as they want to? And then kind of think about what we can do to manage, particularly anxiety, sometimes when that's happening. And also acknowledging that so many of you will be in a different place. It's a long ride for lots of people, and you're not all at the same place, and anxiety won't look the same for everybody in this audience today either. And so when I think about, I often use this slide whenever I'm doing any talk for cancer, and, when we think about breast cancer, there isn't really an emotion that's not touched on for most people throughout from that initial diagnosis through treatment and then even after in the recovery phases or sometimes the maintenance phases of treatment. And so when you think about we can all have any number of these emotional responses, often have them all, and sometimes at different times we'll kind of, go between them. And sometimes we might have had a lot of anxiety at the start that might have then dissipated a little bit during treatment, and then it might have really peak again at different times. And I'm going to talk about a couple of times, particularly with scans, and then also with what's really common, that kind of, fear of it progressing or recurrence again for people that can also bring that anxiety up. It's not only anxiety that gets brought up, it's often a range of emotions like, sometimes people can feel a lack of control, really sad, and sometimes there's, other emotions like fear or anger involved as well. When we also kind of think about, overall, what do we know are the mental health impacts of having cancer and, in particular, having breast cancer. So we know that mental health and adjustment issues are really commonly experienced by people with cancer. And these can include things like depression. The stats vary quite a lot in how many people are impacted by depression, but a number report around 30% of people. Again, anxiety. Again, the stats vary a little bit, but a number of studies report between 20 and 40%. And that would be of what we would consider like kind of significant anxiety. I would argue that everybody will have some anxiety because it's extremely normal. But maybe in terms of significant anxiety, up to around 40% of people. A lot of people experience trauma in relation to their diagnosis and treatment. Body image concerns, particularly with breast cancer, are really common. And then things like social isolation and stigma that can lead to more of the things that I just talked about. And then other really common things, insomnia, so not being able to sleep, often throughout treatment is really common. Fatigue, of course, pain, and fear of cancer recurrence. And a lot of people will have a number of these things and experience them in like called clusters or little groups. And so when we think about, well, what is anxiety? I often like look at thinking about, well, it's actually the brain's way of telling us when there's something dangerous that we should be aware of. And that's actually, anxiety, therefore, is a really normal response. So it's very helpful when our life really is in danger. And it is extremely normal to experience it when we first get a diagnosis. It's maybe not so helpful to us when there's no immediate danger. So when that immediate danger passes for something, it then gets experienced as very kind of uncomfortable symptoms because the body doesn't know kind of what it can do with it. And today we're looking at two ways it commonly presents, as I was saying before, in scan anxiety and in fear of cancer recurrence or progression. And so for a lot of you, I'm sure you'll be very familiar with a lot of these symptoms of anxiety. As I said, we all have them some of the time, but sometimes we're experiencing them a lot more than others. And they become more kind of problematic. And so, common physical ones, as you can see there, like sometimes, we'll feel very tense, our muscles will be very tight. People can experience a lot of shortness of breath or hyperventilation, dizziness, sweating, dry mouth, nausea, diarrhea. One of the problems I often talk to people about is a lot of these symptoms are also symptoms of cancer treatment. So it can be really hard to kind of, you've got a lot of these things happening when you're having treatment, as well as sometimes they're being caused by anxiety. The thoughts related, the thought processes or the cognitive things with anxiety are often the things that people notice. So they're often noticing they're really worrying. They often have thoughts that are really intrusive, really hard to control. And they can have a lot of brain fog, difficulty concentrating, and be really worrying about kind of losing control. And as I said, many emotions that I just talked about before, but with anxiety, kind of commonly low mood can also be there. And irritability and kind of agitation can be pretty common too. And then there's the things that we'll talk a little bit more about today, that when we're anxious, we can engage in various behaviors. Sometimes some of those are avoidant behaviors, so we can like try and we often find ourselves not wanting to do things that we think might trigger the anxiety, or we can be more hypervigilant, so really on guard for symptoms in our body and for checking for things. And we can also do things like seek a lot of reassurance because we're feeling very worried about what's happening for us. So I was just going to also start this little bit by bear with me as I actually read something out to you, because this just really nicely, I guess, summarizes maybe some of the things that some of you have probably gone through when you're due to have a scan. And so this term scanxiety, as I said, is frequently used. And the person who is up on the screen there, Bruce Feiler from who writes for the Times in America, wrote this article back in 2011, but I think it's still very relevant. And so I'm just going to start by reading this. And so he said, I awaken on this chilly morning without speaking. I scoop a few bites of my daughter's oatmeal, then bend down to give them a kiss. The last thing I want to do is alarm them, but I can't resist. Today's an important day for Daddy, I say, pressing my cheek against theirs for a second longer than normal. Then I get in the car and drive. The date is not circled in red on my calendar. Often I don't even write it down. I don't have to. It gets locked into my inner Outlook calendar and gradually grows larger in size and gravity as the day approaches, as if I'm being pulled backward through a looking glass. Objects in front of you are closer than they appear. It's my cancer scan, my regular date with my digital destiny, in which a few seconds of x-rays will show whether the handful of nodules that have been in my lungs since I was diagnosed with bone cancer 3 years ago have grown larger. All patients have complicated relationships with their scans, not unlike the love-hate relationships we have with other technologies in our lives. We first learn we have cancer from scans, then learn from them if that cancer has shrunk or disappeared, then learn if it has come back. Scans are like revolving doors, emotional roulette wheels that spin around us for a few days and spit us out the other side. Land on red, we're in for another trip to Cancerland. Land on black, we have a few more months of freedom. Scans are not all alike, of course. They come in all shapes, sizes, even flavours. I've had scans that required me to drink disgusting semi-sweet liquids, scans that shot a Chernobyl-like dose of radioactive isotopes into my bloodstream, scans that inserted me into a giant donut of a machine, and scans that used a machine that looked like a huge daddy long legs and ran a coffin-sized metal plate over my body. But there's one thing all scans have in common. They engender scanxiety as they approach. Scanxiety is one of those uniquely modern maladies, like carpal tunnel syndrome and blackberry thumb. That's a little dated, I think, that one. Might need an iPhone thumb now. That arise because we're experiencing something entirely new to human beings. For millennia, doctors and patients would have given almost anything to be able to look inside the human body. Now we have an ailment for the fear of what we might find when we do. The name Scanxiety hints at a larger ambiguity we feel towards medical miracles. On the one hand, as someone who was once months away from being overcome by cancer, I know that scans saved my life. Yet they could be killing me too. One aspect of scans that's rarely discussed is the damage the radiation leaves behind. I broke my left femur in a bicycle accident when I was 5, the same spot where my cancer appeared 38 years later. When I asked my oncologist what I might have done differently had I known such an outcome was possible, he said nothing. If you'd gotten regular scans, the scans might have given you cancer. What about all the radiation I'm currently receiving? I said. The oncologist says, I'm trying to protect you from the cancer you have now, he said, not one you might have in the future. The medical profession is aware that patients suffer stress as our scans approach. Dr. Holland, a psychiatrist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Centre, refers to the condition as pre-scan psychosis. Everybody feels it to one extent or another, she tells me, particularly people who feel they have to know what's coming next. And if there's anything true about cancer, it's the unpredictability about what's coming next. As my scans approach, I become increasingly wary and deliberate in my actions. I put off major decisions until after I hear the results. My breathing gets tighter, and those regular drives to the clinic are among the most tense I have, though there's nothing I can do at this juncture to affect the outcome. On the morning of my latest scan, the lung doctor enters the room tentatively. My body tenses. How are you feeling? He asks. You tell me, I respond. The nodules haven't changed, he says. If you didn't have a history of osteosarcoma, I would ask why you're in my office right now. It occurs to me that scans may be the only area of modern life in which progress is not embraced. We measure success in sameness. As I'm leaving, I stop at the desk and set my next appointment. The calendar starts again. And that's an excerpt from one of his books. Whenever I read that, I'm just reminded of how, these things that people will kind of, your medical practitioners will give you the date for a next scan or kind of, be if all going well, I'll see you in 3 months for that scan. And I think this just really sums up so kind of neatly for me that range of emotions people sometimes feel when they have to go for these scans, and that it's actually, not a very normal thing to have to do it all. And there's such a range of emotions and behaviors and things that people do. Um, and so I guess, sometimes I will ask people to kind of think about, like think back to maybe that first scan you had, and what that felt like. Because sometimes for people, that first scan that they had, most people are going to remember it. And most people are going to remember feeling pretty anxious. Or it might not have even always been the first scan, because sometimes the first scan you didn't know what was going to happen. It might have been your second scan. So there's a lot of that though that stays in our head and stays in our mind. So when we have a scan coming up, we often, have things that are happening beforehand, on the day, and while we're waiting for the results. So there's kind of opportunities for anxiety at all three of these occasions. And so if we want to define scanxiety, it's really that feeling of terror and dread that we experience pre-scan, post-scan, and while we wait for the results. And as I said, it's often magnified because sometimes the diagnosis itself has been quite traumatic for people. We've almost always got some fear that the cancer is going to return or progress. And there might be like a lot of anxiety associated. Do we need to have more treatment? Maybe there's going to be more discomfort. And for a lot of people, that's pretty anxiety provoking. So we know that it's normal. And I think it's just a really important thing to say that it's not abnormal to have this anxiety about scans at all. In fact, almost, I don't know, like it's really hard to imagine that people don't kind of feel any, like some people have ways that they found to control it. And that's one of the things that we're always aiming to do or to talk about today. A lot of people report that waiting for the results is the worst bit. A lack of information can really exacerbate it. If you don't feel like you've got good communication with the health professionals or your treating team, it can really contribute to the anxiety increasing. And family members also experience it. And today I'm not going to talk very much about carers, but one of the things we do know is that carers experience these things just like people who have cancer do as well. And so we have this, like a lot of you have probably seen some things like this before, that we often have this cycle of thoughts, feelings, and behavior that occurs when we start to become anxious. So with the scan, it might be that we start to worry, we start to predict what we think will happen. And we often, sometimes the thoughts aren't very positive. Sometimes it's like there's a real like fearing the worst, imagining that it's going to be a bad result. And so obviously if we're doing that, we'll start to feel more nervous, anxious, sometimes helpless. We can then experience a whole lot of physical sensations. Some people will have this during the scan. Some people will have it before. Some people may have it after. It's probably the physical sensations of a racing heart and tightening of the chest and breathing are often experienced in that just before a scan, or sometimes for people during the scan. And then we can do certain behaviors to try and control that. So we might practice, for some people in an attempt to control, they might try and avoid. And for some people that they're really terrified of scans, they sometimes will try and avoid the scans. Or otherwise, they might just put a lot of things on hold. And not do certain things, and then that can kind of keep the vicious cycle going. So we're always thinking about ways to kind of exit this cycle and think about ways that we can increase our coping resources. And so I often you know, ask people to also think about that. I'm sure so many of you, and maybe at the end of today, if you want to share any of those things with each other, you're very welcome to think about. You'll have so many things that you'll have already developed that really help. And you'll also have some things sometimes that you wish someone else had told you that might be helpful, to share with other people. So always encourage you to kind of share any tips or tools that you know have helped you. And so some of the things we know that can help, I guess, are thinking about, knowing really clearly what is anxiety and what your signs are. And just that sort of simple act. It sounds really simple, but it's not simple as it seems. Just to label it and kind of acknowledge what it is. That's something we universally try and do in almost anything when we're trying to treat anxiety is helping people kind of say, okay, I notice I'm being anxious. So even just saying that sometimes makes us make one little step back of kind of not being completely in the moment of anxiety, but sort of stepping back and looking at ourselves and recognizing, okay, this is coming up. I know I get anxious. And that immediately can bring us into more of a coping mode and what can we do about it before the scan. And a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of you will already practice this to try and see the people you like, avoid the stressful people in your life. If there's someone that really stresses you out, don't ask them to take you to the scan. Try and pick a really calm person that can accompany you and be around them in the time before. Try to have a regular practice, where you can of what's realistic, kind of, exercise that might just be a really slow walk. It doesn't have to be really vigorous exercise. Might be a meditation. That even might be a simple 5-minute one. It might be a 2-minute one that you just really like, and you can practice kind of in those days and the day leading up to the scan. And anything that that you find relaxing. Maybe that is like a more, kind of formal breathing exercise or relaxation exercise you do, but it might also just be listening to music or doing something that really relaxes you. Might be, like spending time with your cat or your dog. Try and think about the things that you are likely to raise your anxiety. So when I say healthy diet, it's probably more of a, just think about things that will exacerbate anxiety on the day. So for some people, some people, I'm one of those people that would find it hard to get through my day without caffeine. But for some people, I also notice if I'm really anxious, probably not going to help me if I had 5 cups of coffee in a day. So think about the things that are going to sometimes peak our anxiety. Know what we need before the scan. So make sure you've got the information you need. Like by that, it might mean talk to your treating team about what's the realistic time frame, like when are you going to find the results, what's going to happen on the day, kind of have some knowledge of what's likely to occur. I know I've spoken to groups of women before, and I know sometimes, unfortunately, you can have best laid plans and then you get somewhere and you've got hours of waiting and it can go a bit astray. So we can only do what is in our control. If you can, I know, again, this is really hard in hospital systems sometimes. It's often better for people to schedule their scan in the mornings because there are less delays. Afternoon scans can be really hard because they're more likely to be behind, and then you're more likely to have time to build up that worry. And as I was saying before, know when you're going to get your results. So sometimes we can start to worry because we thought we were going to, kind of get them a couple of days after they haven't come yet. What does that mean? So kind of having a realistic understanding of when they're likely to come can help. And the things that during a scan can really help, distraction's something that we won't always, we don't recommend for everything, but we certainly do in a scan. Like it's something that can be really helpful to think about what's just going to get you through that scan. If you've got to be in an uncomfortable scan for sometimes a bit of a length of time, it can be really helpful to think about, what kind of what sort of shopping list you're going to create in your head, or what sort of image you're going to be able to bring along, or maybe you've got some planning you're doing for something else in your mind that can kind of distract you. Yeah, we really recommend bringing along someone supportive, although for some people they're like, I just need to do this on my own. So, listen to yourself. Medication can help. Like if people have really significant scan anxiety, talk to your doctor about what they can give you that can help just get through that immediate moment of a scan, always like tell the treating team that you're feeling anxious because they're there to help you. And things like, as I was saying before, sometimes having a relaxing image, like we all have a place or a time maybe in our minds that we can think of that is where's like a go-to relaxing, for you. Maybe for me it's a beach, maybe for you it's, like your backyard. And then things like mindfulness can help, which is that being that sort of awareness of the present moment and just focusing on one thing you can control, which sometimes is like things like a mindfulness of the breath exercise, and having a go-to breathing exercise that you've practiced before can be useful during a scan. But I'd say the little tip is remember, if we practice them before, they're more likely to be helpful on the day. And while we wait for results, I guess it's really important to keep reminding ourselves of what we can and can't control. We can't control the result. That's going to occur no matter what we do. So try and remind ourselves this is a time where distraction and doing things with joy is really helpful. Talk to your supports as you need. If you're finding it's really peaking at times, as you know, the result's going to come. Sometimes practice some meditation, do something relaxing, and have that kind of little same statements. Maybe you remind yourself that are helpful and kind of pre-prepare them to kind of say to yourself after. And so I guess because we know that self-talk really matters, we know that, when we've got those kind of thoughts like I can't cope, I can't manage this, we're much more likely to become lower in mood, withdraw, and we might find ourselves much more fatigued and have difficulty sleeping. It's also really normal to have thoughts like, I can't manage this or I can't cope. It's just trying to catch them when they're there and remind yourself, okay, I'm just having a bad day. This is a bad moment rather than I actually, am a terrible coper. It's like, no, you're going to be as good as anybody really is at coping with a difficult situation. Sometimes it's trying to reframe that in this is just a really hard situation to cope with. What can I do to kind of help myself in this moment? And one of the things that I will often like to remind people that the good thing about Scanxiety is it's really uncomfortable, it's really unpleasant, but it's not going to change your pathology of the scan. So also sometimes that can be really reassuring to remind ourselves it's not going to change the result. Like it's unpleasant for me. And if the worst that happens is I get that badly, I'll still get through it. But it won't change your scan result. So that trying to remove the pressure you have to get everything right. And if we like, it's not the end of the world if we, feel like, oh, I really like lost it on that day. Like, okay, it might just be, well, what do I need to do to try and make it a little bit better for myself the next time? And so sometimes we know that, yep, this is one of the obvious ways anxiety presents, and most people when they've got it, and for, large majority of people with breast cancer, especially, in those first few years, you often have pretty frequent scans, and sometimes they're going to continue for years and years and years. And so we know that they're the obvious times it peaks, but sometimes it's also reminding ourselves that what we're carrying underneath can be there. Did someone just say something? No? Sorry, that's okay. Just thought I had a little. And so what we're carrying underneath can sometimes be, like a kind of that bigger fear that just peaks at scan time, but it can also be that we're quite scared of cancer recurring or progressing. Because for some people, it's not that it's about recurrence, they still got it, they're worried about it getting worse. And so this, again, like Scanxiety, but even probably more so, because some people get through scans okay for whatever reason, but like the statistics on fear of cancer recurrence or progression are almost 100% of people experience this to some extent. So, this one puts it at 97%, like so pretty close to almost everybody. And at its worst, it can be really interfering to people and can be quite crippling. People have varying degrees of how much they worry about cancer recurring or progressing. But, so sometimes, people will have that feeling that they feel too scared to live, too scared to die. I mean, that's a pretty full-on thing to kind of to feel. And a lot of people will certainly feel that life is stalled or been put on hold, with no way of knowing how to get started or move forward again. And that's when it becomes really crippling for people, and we often want to try and intervene. So in general, fear of cancer recurrence or progression is the fear, worry, or concern relating to the possibility that cancer will come back or progress. So when it's kind of, as I said, some people have this to a minimal degree, and they like it comes into their head, you know, in fleeting moments, on their worst days, but it's not there all the time. For other people, it can be quite constant and intrusive, and they can be worrying and ruminating. So really focusing on that worry about the cancer on a kind of daily basis, and a lot of the day. And then they can become quite hypervigilant to physical symptoms. So really tuned into their body, and trying to notice what's happening. Which is always like, you know, it's the kind of inevitability of having cancer, because although, you know, a lot of people will maybe that kind of talk to you about, you know, try not to worry, or, you know, oh, just don't think about it. It's also really hard not to do that when it is a physical thing. And so one of the ways in which most people get diagnosed is because they've noticed something. So it can be also really hard not to be noticing and monitoring your body. We've just got to find the balance of what's useful health behavior and what becomes unhelpful. So sometimes people are doing too much avoidance where they don't want to go see their medical professionals anymore, and that can obviously be not very helpful for their health. Or there can be a lot of excessive level of symptom checking and screening, which can really interfere with our daily functioning, and then be very associated with distress and anxiety, and impact on quality of life. So that fear can take many forms. For some people, it's, you know, it's the more extreme fear of death. For some people, it's more fear of further treatments because, you know, sometimes they're not very pleasant. Fear of further disfigurements, disability, pain can also be present. Just fear of more suffering. And fear of not being able to fulfill, you know, just obligations in life, like whether that be as a partner, as a mother, as a daughter, you know, as a friend. There's often that, what would I do if I got cancer again, or it gets worse? How am I going to manage? So what can be helpful? I guess when I talk about these things, and one of the things I find really hard when I'm doing these webinars is because, you know, normally I'm used to being with people kind of one-on-one in a room, and we can pace this. And one of the things when I do these, I'm aware that I'm giving like lots of kind of things that are hard all at once to talk about. But I guess in doing it, I'm trying to remind people there's a lot of things we can do to manage this. And so one of the things that can be really helpful is to try and know what your triggers are. So like for a lot of people, it's pretty apparent what their triggers are for these fears. Sometimes they're things like medical appointments, when other people start talking about other people's cancer, when people start talking about someone dying. There's sometimes some pretty obvious triggers. For some other people, they're things that wouldn't be apparent to other people, and they'd have no idea. It's just trying to know for yourself what your triggers are. It's really helpful to understand that cycle of fear and how the trigger can make us anxious, and how that can lead to thoughts. And then sometimes physical symptoms, like we just, you know, get that muscle tightness, we get more fatigued, and then we can fear that cancer's coming back because maybe we're experiencing some pain from that muscle tension, and we're like, oh, maybe that's the cancer getting worse. Sometimes it's anxiety. Notice when we're doing a lot of checking, scanning of our body and seeking a lot of reassurance, noticing when that's gotten out of what would be your usual level, it's really increasing. And then notice the above things kind of, and think about like, what are your calming strategies that you can use? So what are the things that bring you back maybe to the here and now instead of going into the kind of what ifs? So the things that can help us, some of you might have done some of these things before. So there's a really like long-standing muscle, like I guess anxiety management technique called progressive muscle relaxation, which is really just that tensing and relaxing all the areas of our body to kind of achieve some sense of the muscles relaxing. There's all sorts of examples of ways we can practice slower or calm breathing. There's so many apps now that we can use. There's so many online kind of breathing exercises that you can check into, or if you ever, kind of having an appointment with any of your health professionals, a lot of them can probably direct you to one of those. And also that idea of mindfulness meditation, which again, a number of you will be aware of. And I think at the end, I've got links to things like Cancer Mind Care, which has lots of really good examples of all of these things on it. But again, we need to practice these things for them to be useful. So we don't need to like spend, 2 hours a day doing them, but we need to try to, even when they're 5 or 10 minute little things we do, if we can practice it regularly, it's much more likely to be helpful when we feel stressed or more anxious. The other thing that we really try and notice and kind of try and focus on are noticing our thoughts and our patterns of thoughts. So a lot of times with anxiety and particularly with fear of cancer recurrence or progression, we can notice that we're catastrophizing. So like coming up with the worst possible outcome, we're jumping to conclusions, assuming it's a, kind of done deal when we don't actually know that yet at all, and it may well, and often isn't. We can find ourselves thinking in really extreme ways. And we often, and I see people do this a lot, will minimize our own coping strategies. So we're often, when we're feeling anxious, underestimating our capacity. So sometimes it's really helpful to just try and say our thoughts out loud, write them down, tell someone. For some people, they find it really helpful to talk it out. For other people, they find it much more helpful to write it down and for them to step away and kind of look at their thoughts. All of these things, again, are trying to aim to give us that one step back from our thoughts. And so I'd say anything that we do that's doing that is a really helpful thing. And for a lot of people, containing the worry is very helpful. So there's a strategy that we use in psychology that's called worry time. And that's where we just kind of schedule a time to worry for, 10, 20 minutes a day. And we direct our brain to say, no, I'm not going to do it now, I'm going to do it then. So even doing that gives it sort of a containment. I guess it kind of, puts a bit of a safe buffer around the worry so you don't have to be attending to it as much. And other ways we sometimes manage worry is trying to detach a little bit from it. So again, that step outside of it. And so some people use strategies like imagining their worries in clouds and they watch them pass by. A lot of you might have heard of those kind of ones, or things like a really common one's leaves on a stream down a river. So imagining the various worries are just kind of floating on by you, rather than you being immersed in them. And we also, with fear of cancer progression or recurrence, really want to try and put a limit on our checking or over monitoring of our symptoms. As I said, I know when we have someone gets a diagnosis of cancer, it's often not realistic not to check at all. But it's just about like asking often your health professionals, well, what would you expect? And they'll often tell you like, you don't need to be monitoring yourself continually. And so when we're doing that, we need to try and put a limit on it. Or doing things like, looking up too many things online, or sort of putting, into search engines, our symptoms all the time, because it can often give us some things to worry about. And notice if we're avoiding and try and challenge our avoidance. If it's unhelpful avoidance, like avoidance isn't always unhelpful, it's just kind of recognizing when it is. So like, helpful avoidance might be avoiding that friend that continually talks about something you don't want to talk about. That's okay. But unhelpful avoidance might be avoiding your medical appointments when it's kind of really important to have one. So, ways that we try and cope with uncertainty that are useful is try and think about what is and isn't in our control, and try and focus on what is in our control and make some goals around that. So often things like exercise, diet for some people, in terms of, just having a really kind of healthy broad range of things that make us feel good when we eat, seeing friends, and focusing on sleep and social activities, I find, for people is one of the things that kind of makes them feel that there's something they can do that they can control. Also focusing on our values, so thinking about what really matters to us, what's important to us, and set goals around these values. So, for some people that might be that they really value family, and actually they've been working quite a lot, and they want to set a goal around spending more time with their family and reducing how much they're doing something else and utilize our supports. So I guess when we like put it all together and think about, again, coming back to that idea of riding the wave after thinking about, okay, there's these things that we're often having to deal with throughout breast cancer. We're looking at, adjustment versus recovery. A lot of the time we're often adjusting, reevaluating life, looking at our values, finding meaning, bringing in compassion and taking time to look after ourselves. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of those things now, and particularly for that managing the range of peaks and troughs that will occur throughout having a breast cancer diagnosis. So again, remind ourselves that it's really normal that we're going to go through peaks and troughs. And I've put in this idea, this thing that we often call like double awareness. So which really means like kind of maintaining hope while acknowledging grief. So sometimes we can have those scary, anxiety provoking thoughts, fearful thoughts. We can also be really hopeful. And it's just been, we don't have to be one or the other. Just notice that we can have both at the same time. And it's really important to, did someone, no, it was someone to seek guidance and kind of think about when we need to seek help. I'll again quite briefly touch on these things about trying to like think about how we bring a kind of compassionate voice to ourselves. And so understanding when we're in cancer, we're in a really threat-based system. So when we, particularly at that time of first diagnosis or throughout treatment, any kind of treatment really, our body's in a little bit of threat mode. And so we really want to kind of increase self-soothing and compassion as much as we can to try and calm that system down. And then there are some things that kind of get in the way of doing that. It's easier said than done. We can be quite critical to ourselves. So sometimes, getting in the way of being compassionate or speaking kindly to ourselves as we might do to others, are sometimes things like should statements, I should be, like exercising every day. I should be, being the best, kind of friend that I can be because my friend's going through a hard time. So often there's some things that get in the way, and we put a lot of rules around ourselves. And so we often want to really think about that when we criticize ourselves, it just really increases that threat response that we're in, and it makes our body kind of, more anxious and increases the stress response. And it often increases that thought that we should be doing better or able to do more. And instead, we're often trying to remind ourselves, I'm just human. I'm doing what I can. It doesn't have to be unrealistic, just something that kind of is really grounding. And what advice you might give to someone if they are in your position, and what you would kind of hope that they would be saying to themselves. One of the ways, and we use these, I'll use some of these things myself all the time in terms of like noticing if I'm being critical. Like you'll often notice that your voice isn't very nice to yourself when you're critical. It's often, if you said it out loud, it wouldn't be in a very nice tone. It certainly wouldn't be encouraging. It often doesn't leave you feeling very good. So even trying to just sometimes change that voice in your head to be softer, a bit quieter, a bit nicer, as though, if you were talking to a kind of small child and you wanted them to do something or to learn something, kind of know if I'm like yelling at them, it's not that helpful. And sometimes in our head, we realize we're kind of doing that to ourselves. And so, like a lot of the time, it can be helpful just to think about, and sometimes that really try and step back to think about, how do you want to treat yourself? Are there qualities you still need to develop? What would being more compassionate actually look like? Like for some people, it's really helpful to imagine a person that can be themselves or someone that they really admire, and like kind of think of that little image of like what's their posture like? What's their tone of voice like? Like, how are they looking at me? They're probably not frowning at me, in an agitated way. They're probably, kind of got a nice, calm, peaceful expression on their face. And how do you start to do that for yourself? Like, what are the ways you can try and bring that kind of compassion to yourself when you're having a hard day? And then when you often, people probably talk to you about cancer and reflecting on our values. We can't always do this. Like sometimes in treatment, you just got to get through it. But where we can, it's really helpful to kind of think about sometimes cancer-free time. And I say that with knowing that, of course, it's not, I know that we can't actually remove it sometimes, but by that I mean like sometimes choose a time where you're just going to go to the movies, you're going to go talk to a friend who makes you laugh. You don't talk about cancer. There's just that little bit of time where it's like, I'm just me. And in that, think about, what are your values? And often our values in relationship to things like our relationships, personal growth, work, other things. So really, kind of reflect on where what's important for me. Well, this is what I can control. As we kind of get to the end of today, I'd also like to think about like what are the times, when we know we need more help? Because sometimes we're like really going through this, we're doing a pretty good job. Like we're actually coping okay. We've got really good friends or family around us if we're lucky. And we're managing okay. Other times we're not. And again, when they're the times where we're not, like I guess I'd encourage you to think about, well, how distressing is it? How much is it interfering in your life? And how long do things like the anxiety or worry last for? And if the answers to those are, yeah, it's very distressing, it's really interfering in my life, and the worry and anxiety is lasting for a long time, then I would say that's time to really reach out, look for help. So, how do you do that? Sometimes it's our existing supports. Like sometimes we just want to spend more time with those people who make us feel good. We've got a really good friend that's an excellent kind of person to spend time with. Our partner's great. Use those. But there are other times as well where we need to go further than that and think about, okay, how would I do that? So if you need to ask for help, like maybe the things that we think about, how do I, who do I ask? So think about who can help you sometimes. Like maybe there's your partner or a friend that can help you kind of think about the support options. If you've got a good GP, they're often invaluable to help you think about that, or your treating team, if you're regularly still seeing them, can often guide you to the right help or where you might want to find that. And if there are, of course, all those kind of, there's a lot of things online. There are so many things online, and a lot of them are really helpful. So as I was reminding you before, things like the Cancer Mind Care website are great for when we just want to, things that, we just want to check in and we want to remind ourselves, or maybe want to develop some more strategies. Go and look at it. It will, has a lot of really useful things, meditations on there and useful things you can do. There's also sometimes some online things when we notice that anxiety's gotten pretty bad, but maybe we want to try and work our way through it. And this website called This Way Up has a lot of free materials and lots of modules to use. So a lot of them go over the course of many weeks. And you can work your way through some of those that can be really helpful. Of course, there's your own support groups, like you're in now, like with these organizations like Think Pink, of course, utilize those. And then like when things are often, like if we're in a bit more of a crisis, obviously, use those helplines that we might need, like Lifeline or Beyond Blue if we're feeling, very, or there was any amount of risk, and talk to your GP or your treating team about a mental health care plan. If you're thinking that actually, I think I just really want to go and see someone, and work my way through some of these things and ask for those Medicare rebated sessions.
And
So
I
there's a lot of,
just
sorry.
just about the mental healthcare plan. Um,
Mm,
through Think Pink, just reminding ladies here that we do have a partnership with a psychology practice called Living Change. So if you do need some psychology assistance, we have partnership allows you to get bulk billed sessions, so you won't have to pay for 10 sessions through Living Change. And yeah, if you'd like more information about that, just feel free to reach out to me through email, or you can text me or call, whatever you like. Um,
That's amazing. I didn't know about that, Christina. So that's
yeah,
amazing. Like that's so good because that is one of the barriers. Like a lot of people will say, and so many times I give talks like this to other things, and that is one of the things that comes up is the financial burden. Sometimes of gap fees or things when like people have often their finances have taken a pretty big hit in cancer
yeah,
a lot of the time. So that's really lovely to hear. And I guess I would just say with using, and that's a really great like resource that you've got there. And to, kind of like, then I know it's still not easy to reach out for help if we don't have that financial burden. It's certainly a little bit easier. And then like remind ourselves it can take time to form a connection with someone. So sometimes give it a few sessions. Like the first one, look, you probably get a pretty good feeling in your first session either way, but by the second session, so I'd say give it two though a lot of the time, unless it was like, no way, this is not going to work for me. But sometimes it can take a little bit of time to form that connection. But if you don't form the connection, there are many psychologists out there, or counselors. So it's not one person only that there's one person. And then the different kinds of treatment that we can think about, there are some really common kind of evidence-based treatments. There's a lot for cancer though that also like draw on a lot of these things, but people that work with cancer also have put together a number of these kind of treatments and are very aware of needing to think about what's realistic with cancer, and we're often thinking about adjustments. So a lot of treatments focus on what I've put there as ACT, so which stands for acceptance and commitment therapy, bit of a kind of long name to really say it focuses on values. Acceptance is a funny word, so sometimes people have a bit of a resistance to that word, but it really focuses on, it means just it utilizes ways of not getting caught up in our thoughts so much, and it does have quite a big focus on values. And then cognitive behavior therapy, which is what of CBT there, is focused a lot of the time on changing our thinking patterns, beliefs, and behaviors. ACT still uses some of that though, so it kind of assumes that. And then there are other therapies that are much more compassion focused based, and a whole variety that I haven't put here as well that people will draw on and use. But there's not sort of one fit for all. And sometimes I encourage you to, just like if you're going to go see someone, you can ask them about the kind of therapy they use and look it up and see if you think it's right for you. And I'll stay on that one because that's the end of my slides. Does anyone have any questions? I don't think I can see the chat function right now. So if there is anything in the chat, Christina, let me know.
um, we just had a comment. Um, we just had a few comments. Um, so I can just read them out to you.
Sure.
Michaela said she's feeling great today. It's a chemo-free week, definitely. Oh yeah, love to learn about Scanxiety, as she feels like she always jumps to the worst case scenario. So hopefully, Michaela, you've taken away some tools today. Rebecca said it's managing Scanxiety, but also having to juggle the anxiety while normal life still goes on. You still have to go to work. You still have to pretend everything is okay, even though it's not. Um, which is very, very common, Rebecca. Um, but yeah, that was all. There's no questions per se. Does anybody have any specific questions? Feel free to come off mute. Rebecca said, are there any trauma-based therapies that you could recommend?
Yeah, there are. One of them is called EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Some psychologists do that, some don't. So that's one that really is very trauma focused, sometimes on the trauma of what's happened in treatment or first diagnosis. So, but if you put EMDR into a search engine, look that up, it'll explain it a little bit. So that is definitely a good evidence-based therapy for trauma. And also kind of CBT informed something called schema therapy is also often used with trauma quite a lot and is really useful as well. So again, if you put maybe CBT schema therapy in for trauma, they're two both really evidence-based approaches that can be really useful for trauma, and trauma is a big thing. But also a lot of therapists will be able to certainly help a lot with trauma, even if they don't practice EMDR, and not everybody needs those, really specific trauma therapies, but for some people they do.
Vanessa, any other questions, ladies? Feel free to jump off mute.
You're also really welcome to email anything across to Christina, and she can, ask me if there's something that anybody wants to, kind of ask, but they don't want to shout out now. That's, use that after. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. That was absolutely wonderful, and I've definitely learned a lot as well. And
Pleasure.
yeah, it was amazing to have you on here.
Yeah,
Oh, are you saying something? Sorry, you're just
no,
on.
I just stopped sharing. Can you hear me still?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Judy, are you trying to say something to us? Um, you're on mute, that's all.
Thank you, everyone. I can see some of the thank yous coming through. So that, yeah, lovely to spend time with you. As I said, I know this is always like a little bit like I'm, if I was in the room, yeah, you'd
Yeah.
be able to, feel like I was, that able to genuinely like let you know that, I'm just, it's coming along is really like the fact that you've bothered to spend an hour. I thank you for doing that. So yeah. Thanks, everyone. Really nice to meet you today.
Wendy,
Can I say a thank you? Yeah, I can't see where to put up my hand today for some reason. But anyway, so I'll just say hello. Thank you, Garty. So I've been through breast cancer, 2 different types, 10 years apart. So the last time was 2022. And it's just so good to see everyone, hear it all afresh, because even though 2022, I feel like I should have my life all together.
No, yeah.
The financial impacts are so big.
So massive. Yeah.
But what I wanted to say is I've done, just for everyone else's sake, the first time walking, just walking 30 to 40 minutes, not a power walk, just going for a walk was just wonderful most days. The best thing I ever did for Scanxiety was go on an island holiday for a few days for my results, have the scan, fly out, fly back in, get the results, because when you're on an island holiday, but that's the only island holiday I've been able to afford.
Yeah, but then you can take
it as a distraction.
You can take the image.
Yeah.
Take the image with you forever.
That's it. And then noticing, walking helped me notice, but I actually took up doodling. And I didn't know what I was going to draw, but I would just start, and that was a whole big journey that was really beautiful and got me into that flow, into that place where cancer wasn't.
Yeah, great.
So even anything, where finger painting class or water, anything that takes you away has been enormously helpful. So just wanted to say, some practical things that have helped me through this journey twice. So so all good. But
thank you.
Here I am again, So we just reframe, and so thank you. It was so good to hear all those things, So
it's a pleasure. Hope everyone has a great day. And on that note of the island holiday, we'll keep that.
Go there.
Yeah, we'll all go there. Okay. All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see you all. Bye.